Looking at these records set by teams over 162-game seasons with high strikeout numbers in the game, it's no surprise there's a recent team here in the 2023 Minnesota Twins who struck out 1,654 times. That's an average of 10 strikeouts per game every single night. Unsurprisingly, the team later was Joey Gallo, who struck out 142 times in 282 at-bats, a strikeout rate just under 50%. But interestingly, he ranked 45th in the entire league for 2023. Byron Buxton struck out 109 times over 304 at-bats, only playing 85 games due to injury. And the team had 7 players who struck out 100 times or more. And Matt Wallner, who in 213 at-bats, struck out 80 times. And that would end with 1,654 strikeouts and 5,489 at-bats. And you may think that would result in a poor season, but Minnesota finished first in the AL Central, going 87-75, still hitting the third most home runs and drawing the third most walks. The pitching obviously had to be strong, with their 3.87 ERA, the 4th best in the American League. And funny enough, they struck out the most batters at 1,560. And then they did something even more surprising, as they actually won a playoff game. Then they would win the series after losing 18 straight playoff games before. So when you combine a team that strikes out a lot, and also records a lot of strikeouts, you get an 87-win first-place team that did what no Twins team since 2002 could do. Then you trade them all away 2 years later. In the age of the 3 true outcomes, the Twins are the poster child team, as the 2019 team is tied with the 2023 Braves for the most home runs in the season, as in both those years, they hit 307 home runs. 2019 was the peak of the juice balls, as a record 6,776 home runs would be hit league-wide, before the top 5 home run hitting teams of all time here, but none more than the Twins. The Twins earned the nickname of Bomba Squad for a reason. 5 players hit over 30 home runs, with Nelson Cruz hitting the most at 41, and it was the entire team who was hitting home runs. The team had 8 players hit 20 home runs or more, which is the all-time record. They won 101 games, but they only continued that playoff losing streak after being swept by the Yankees, who only hit 306 home runs. Then came the 2023 Atlanta Braves, who would match the mark, but they did it with more firepower at the top. Ronald Acuna Jr. and Matt Olson led the way, with Olson hitting 54 of them to set the franchise record, while Acuna became the only member of the 40-70 club, as 7 different Braves finished with at least 20 home runs. The 23 Braves will be remembered as one of the best offensive teams ever. They led the league in slugging, runs, and OPS, and they did in this era of tough pitching, and apparently, these balls were no longer juiced, as no other team hit 250 home runs that year besides the Atlanta Braves. And hitting a lot of home runs unsurprisingly works, as the 6 teams the most all time all won 100 games or more, but not one of those teams won the World Series, including the 23 Braves, who just like the Twins, would lose in the LDS. And we move on to the coolest of home runs, and another tie, with the 2000 Oakland A's and the 2006 Cleveland Indians, who each hit 14 grand slams. The 2000 A's were loaded with power, Jason Giambi, Miguel Tejada, and Eric Chavez, with 9 different players hitting 10 home runs that would complement their rotation as it would end an 8-year playoff drought. And they love when the bases were loaded, as they hit 375 in those situations with a 712 OPS, as they also recorded 203 RBIs. Jason Giambi would hit 3 grand slams himself, as he won MVP, completely clean. But 6 years later, the 2006 Indians would match them. That team was great offensively, finishing top 5 in slug and average. And with the bases loaded, they hit 382 with a 737 slug, as it drove in 171. Travis Hafner led the charge with 6 grand slams, tied with Don Mattingly in 1987 for the most by a single player in one season. But they would finish 6 games under 500, and 4th in their division. With the 2nd worst ERA in the league, a few grand slams could not overcome it. The 90s and 2000s brought many great offensive teams out of Cleveland, and no team was better at driving in runs in a 162-game season than the 99 team, as they would record 960 RBIs. The team was simply an offensive machine. Not only did they drive in the most runners, they set the record for the most runs at 1,009. And like Travis Hafner helped his team reach the Grand Slam record, it was Manny Ramirez who was the leader here, as he drove in 165 runners by himself, the most by any player since 1938. But he was not alone. Jim Thome, Roberto Alomar, and Richie Sexson drove in 100, and David Justice would add 88, while 5 different players scored 100 runs. As in 162 games, they were only shut out 3 times, as they won 96 games and took the AL Central, but they would be eliminated in the first round, as just like the 23 Braves, they had a historic offense, but their playoff run was short. The opposite of driving in runs is giving up runs, and the team who did that the most was the 1996 Detroit Tigers, who would give up 1,103 runs. That's nearly 7 runs per game, as their team ERA was 6.38, and not a single starter had an ERA under 5, and no pitcher won more than 7 games, as they also faced 6,713 batters, which was the most in MLB history. And the offense wasn't too bad, with the successful fielder, Ruben Sierra, Tony Clark, and even Alan Trammell in his final season, as they would score 738 runs. But when your team gives up an average of 7 runs per game, that's tough for even the best offense. That's the biggest reason they went 53-109, the worst in their history until 2003 and 2019, made even worse by the fact they went 0-12 against the Cleveland Indians, being outscored 79-28. Finding out what happens when an unstoppable force meets a movable object. Maybe the most frustrating common occurrence is watching your team ground into a double play, and Red Sox fans in 1990 had to watch their team do it more than anyone before or after, as they would ground into 174 double plays during the season. The leader was Tony Pena. The slow-footed catcher would ground into 23 double plays, but there were many close to him. Dwight Evans and Ellis Brooks would each ground into 18, and Carlos Quintana, Jody Reed, and Mike Greenwell would ground into 19. Every one of their 9 regular starters would ground into at least 10. They had the best average in the league at 272, but they were 10th in runs and RBIs. And despite missing out on more production, they still won 88 games to win the AL East. But they ran into the real high-powered offense in the Oakland A's, who would sweep them for their 3rd straight pennant. But as I talked about in a recent video about lopsided trades, the worst part of the year was a trade they made, sending hometown prospect Jeff Bagwell to the Astros for pitcher Larry Anderson, missing out on the 221 double plays he could have had in a Red Sox uniform. The year of 1988 was called the year of the balk, and created some records that will probably never be broken. Going into the season, MLB put a real emphasis on calling balks, and they showcased that right away, calling 12 balks in one spring training game, including 9 on Charlie Huff, and they were just getting started. And the one team hit the hardest was the Oakland A's. Tony La Russa exhausted himself arguing with umpires over these calls, and like all these records have one that really helped the numbers, this time it was Dave Stewart. He broke Steve Carlson's single-season balk record of 11 by May 18th. And after they would cool down with the balks, he would end with 16, with Bob Welch finishing 2nd at 13. And in the end, the A's were called for 76 balks, 8 more than the runner-up in the Detroit Tigers. 924 balks were called during the season, and the 17 highest balk totals in the season by a team all came from that season. And despite facing balk oppression, the A's still won 104 games and the AL pennant. But in the World Series, they would lose to the Dodgers, Dennis Eckersley wishing he was just called for a balk rather than giving up his most famous home run. The A's seem to be here a few times, and this time it's more fun than the balks, as the 1976 team has the MLB record for most stolen bases by a team in a 162-game season with 341. The previous year brought an end to the A's reign, as they lost their chance at a four-peat after losing in the LCS. And after losing Reggie Jackson and Ray Fosse, they were going to utilize a strategy that relied on speed. Honestly, it helps when you have guys like Bill North, Bert Campaneris, and Don Baylor, who would all end up stealing 50 bases, with Bill North leading the league with 75. They would have 8 guys who stole at least 20, with Larry Lynn stealing 20, and Matt Alexander stealing 30 in less than 70 games. 6 of the top 15 in the American League were from the A's, having to take advantage of their situations, as they finished 21st in total hits at a time when there were just 24 teams. And this would result in 87 wins, the first time they didn't make the playoffs since 1970, and they would not reach that win total again until 12 years later. The 76 A's doing this before they had the best base stealer in history, as speed on the bases in the clubhouse would be big for the team. We talked about the team that struck out the most times, but now let's talk about the team that struck out the most hitters, that being the 2018 Houston Astros with 1,687 strikeouts. Coming off their first World Series title, they only got better by trading for Garrett Cole, 1 year after trading for Justin Verlander. Verlander, already one of the best strikeout pitchers ever, reached his peak to that point in 2018 with 290 strikeouts, and right behind him was Garrett Cole with 276 and 14 less innings. And they ultimately had 3 200 strikeout pitchers with Charlie Morton, who had 201, and he only pitched 167 innings because of injury. So the total could have been playing higher, as they also had 3 relievers in the top 10, as they had a league-best 3.11 ERA, leading them to 104 wins. But they would lose to the Red Sox in the LCS. Then 1 year later, they added Zach Greinke, and they finished with just 16 less strikeouts for the second highest total of all time. But they still couldn't finish the job. And since we talked about the most home runs hit, here are the most home runs given up, that coming from that same year, with the 2019 Baltimore Orioles surrendering 305 home runs. Coming off their worst season of all time at 47-115, they were just a little better the next year. They only had 3 pitchers go 100 innings, but they had 5 who gave up 20 home runs or more. 175 of these home runs were given up at Camden Yards, tied with Nationals Park for the third least pitcher-friendly park that year. Of course, with Coors Field at number 1, with the Rockies finishing with the second most home runs given up in history, but they still gave up 35 less than the Orioles. 177 of these 305 were solo home runs, as they gave up 981 runs, the most in the 21st century. That could have been even worse if they were kind enough to allow more base runners, and they would end with a 54-107 record, going 101 and 223 over those 2 years. And they didn't even get the first pick, as the Tigers went 47-114. So that year, the Twins hit 307 home runs, and the Orioles gave up 305. So 20 years after balls were being shrunk, balls were being used at an insane rate. In 1962, after 2 teams left New York, a new team was born in the New York Mets, and they were absolutely awful, setting a record that was recently broken, and another one that's only been tied by the 1963 Mets with 210 errors. The team was not expected to be good, as is commonplace in the first year of an expansion team, but they were not expected to be this bad. Fans actually came in droves to watch this new team, mainly just because of the excitement of a new team. But there was an entertainment factor in how bad they were. Managed by the legendary Casey Stengel, his famous quote on the team was, "Can't anybody here play this game?" They finished with worst average, ERA, and notable here, fielding percentage, as they would commit 210 errors. Rod Cannell led the way with 32 and 497 chances, while 6 different players had 14 or more. A great collection that adds up to a record of 40, 120, and 1. That was the most losses in a 162-game season until the 2024 White Sox went up them with 121, and they only committed 90 errors. Obviously, that's just because the talent is so high even on the worst teams, as the leaders in errors has gone way down over the years. But the Mets didn't change too much the next year, as they won 11 more games to break 50. And funny enough, they again committed 210 errors, with Al Moore leading the way with 27. So while the 2024 White Sox took the loss record, the 62 and 63 Mets can hold their heads high, knowing their errors record will not be broken. We finish here with one that has plenty of chance to be broken in the future, with the most players used in one season at 70. That was set last year by the 2024 Miami Marlins, surpassing the previous record of 69.
Nice.
Held by the 2021 Chicago Cubs. The Marlins made the playoffs for the first time in 20 years in 23, and as they do best, they decided to just go backwards. And the result of a combination of injuries, trades, and roster experimentation, there was a huge roster shuffle. Notably, nearly half of the 70 players had less than 1 full year of MLB service time, including 11 players making their major league debut with the team. Only 8 players played 100 games, and just 2 reached 120, and just 2 of their 45 different pitchers would make at least 20 starts. So it was just an open door for Marlin minor leaguers who wanted their taste of the major leagues. And for the Marlin fans, they had to make sure to not get too attached to any player. Granted, they've had to do that for the last few decades. So a lot of these records come as a result of the outlier of a trend, or a team just being really good, or just really bad. Interestingly, none of the teams mentioned won the World Series. Obviously not surprising for some, but it all has to come together to reach the top, as science has shown that the teams that score more runs than the other teams seem to perform the best. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.